You've probably noticed this before. In a meeting, a conversation, or a debate, there's always that one person who doesn't speak much. They sit back, listening, watching, saying almost nothing, and yet somehow, everyone pays attention when they finally open their mouth. It's strange, right? How can saying less make you look more powerful? In a world where everyone's fighting to be heard, silence feels like a disadvantage. But psychology says the opposite. Silence isn't weakness, it's control. And in the workplace, it's one of the most underestimated superpowers you can develop. Let's decode the psychology of silence and why the quiet ones often end up leading the loud ones. People assume authority comes from dominance, talking first, talking loud, taking space, but real authority often comes from restraint. When you stay silent in a room full of noise, something subtle happens. People start filling in the blanks about you. They assume confidence, intelligence, even mystery. Psychologists call this the power of perceived competence. When information is missing, the brain fills it in with assumptions. And silence gives others room to project strength onto you. It's why the quiet executive commands the meeting, why the calm negotiator makes everyone else uneasy. Because silence shifts the dynamic. You no longer chase attention, you attract it. Every time you pause before responding, you signal that you're processing deeply, not reacting emotionally. That pause creates weight. It turns ordinary words into authority. So in the workplace, your silence doesn't make you invisible. It makes you magnetic. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. In psychology, this is known as social response pressure. It's the internal anxiety people feel when a conversation goes quiet. They rush to fill it. When you can stay silent in those moments, you hold the upper hand. Imagine you're in a negotiation. You make your offer, then stop talking. Seconds feel like minutes for the other person. They start explaining, over-justifying, revealing what they really want. You didn't pressure them. Your silence did. The same thing happens in meetings. When you don't react right away, people keep talking. They expose their logic, their motives, their fears. You get to see the full picture. Because silence invites truth. Law enforcement trainers even teach this technique. It's called the strategic pause. After asking a question, they simply stop talking. The other person almost always fills the space, often with the information they were trying to hide. In everyday work, this works too. Let silence do the heavy lifting. Because silence, used correctly, is not absence. It's a mirror, and people reveal themselves when they're forced to face it. When you're silent, you're not just not speaking. You're processing. Most people listen to reply. They nod. They wait for their turn. They're already forming an answer before you finish. But when you truly listen, you collect data. You read tone, micro-expressions, body language, the real communication beneath the words. Psychologists call this active observation. It's a core part of emotional intelligence, the ability to sense meaning that isn't being said out loud. In a workplace where everyone's competing to talk, few people actually listen. That's why good listeners rise fast. They understand problems better. They read the room before speaking. They make others feel heard, and that creates instant trust. Silence is how you access that skill. It's the foundation of empathy and strategic awareness. So the next time you're tempted to jump in with your opinion, try holding it for 5 more seconds. Watch what happens. You'll start hearing how people think, not just what they say. Every time you speak, your brain burns energy, not just in words, in decisions, in self-monitoring, in emotional regulation. In cognitive psychology, this is called mental load. The more you react, explain, and justify, the faster you drain your limited focus. Now imagine a day at work filled with unnecessary conversations, chatter that goes nowhere, meetings that could have been an email, debates about things that don't even matter. Each of those moments quietly consumes your mental energy, the same energy you need for creativity, problem solving, and decision making. That's why silence isn't just golden, it's efficient. Highly productive people protect their focus like oxygen. They know that every word has a cost, so they spend it wisely. They don't jump into every discussion. They don't over-explain their decisions. They don't feed gossip loops or endless Slack threads. They practice psychological minimalism, doing more by saying less. In other words, silence isn't just about communication, it's energy management. Picture this. Someone challenges you in a meeting. They raise their voice, throw sarcasm, or try to provoke a reaction. Most people respond immediately, defending themselves, matching the tone, escalating tension. But silence breaks that pattern. When you don't react, the other person loses their power. They're expecting a battle, and instead they get stillness. Psychologists call this non-reactive composure. It's emotional discipline, the ability to stay calm under social pressure. It's not passive, it's strategic. Because silence denies the aggressor what they want most: your attention and energy. Try this once. When someone's trying to bait you, pause, breathe. Let the silence stretch. Watch how fast they start to stumble, justify, or backtrack. In the workplace, this form of silence communicates strength far louder than any comeback ever could. Ironically, silence makes people feel heard. When you stop interrupting, others open up. This is something leaders and therapists both understand. You don't build trust by talking. You build it by listening fully, without rushing, without judgment. There's a concept called reflective silence. It's when your quiet presence gives others space to think out loud. And because you don't fill that space with your own ego, they relax. They start associating your presence with safety and clarity. That's how leaders win respect. Not by dominating the room, but by making people feel seen. So when you're silent in a meeting, you're not being passive. You're giving others a moment of psychological oxygen. And they'll remember that feeling long after your words fade. One of the most dangerous habits in professional life is reacting too soon. We speak before we think. We email before we cool off. We say yes before we understand the cost. Silence is the pause between impulse and intelligence. It's the space where emotional control lives. When something frustrates you, silence gives you a buffer. It lets your brain move from the amygdala, emotion, to the prefrontal cortex, logic. That few seconds of quiet literally changes the chemistry of your decision. Smart leaders know this. They don't answer right away. They buy time with silence. Time to think, to plan, to choose a better response. In psychology, this is known as response inhibition. It's one of the strongest predictors of emotional intelligence and long-term success. So next time someone throws you a curveball question, don't rush to fill the silence. Take it, own it. That calm pause is your brain thinking before your mouth reacts. In the workplace, your words don't just communicate, they record. Every statement becomes part of your perceived intelligence and credibility. When you talk too much, you increase the chance of saying something impulsive, unnecessary, or contradictory. But when you speak selectively, every word carries more precision and credibility. It's why people remember what the quiet ones say, because silence acts like a filter. It removes noise and leaves only the essence. There's an old saying in negotiation psychology: he who speaks first loses leverage. In meetings, in leadership, in conflict, it's not about how much you say, but how long your words last after you've said them. Silence gives your message gravity. It turns speech into impact. Here's something few people realize. Silence isn't just a social tool, it's neurological nourishment. Studies from the University of Pavia found that 2 hours of silence per day actually helps the brain grow new cells in the hippocampus, the region linked to memory and learning. In other words, silence literally makes your brain stronger. Constant noise, conversations, notifications, meetings, podcasts, keeps your brain in a reactive state. But when you enter silence, your brain switches modes. It processes, consolidates, creates connections. That's why your best ideas come in the shower or on a quiet walk. Because silence isn't the absence of thought, It's the space where thinking finally begins. Most people see silence as a void to be filled. They can't stand the discomfort of not saying something. But silence isn't emptiness, it's presence. When you master silence, you stop chasing validation through words. You don't need to prove you're right, smart, or capable. You simply are. And that's the deepest form of confidence, the kind that doesn't announce itself. So, in the workplace, the next time you walk into a meeting, remember this. You don't need to be the loudest voice in the room to be the most influential one. Sometimes the person who speaks the least ends up shaping the entire direction. Because silence isn't about muting yourself. It's about mastering yourself. If you've ever been told you're too quiet, don't see it as a weakness. It might just mean you've mastered something others are still chasing: control over your attention, your emotions, and your presence. In a noisy world, silence is rebellion. It's the art of keeping your energy sacred. And once you learn to use it, you'll notice how people start leaning in when you finally decide to speak. Because true power doesn't shout, it whispers. And the world listens. So stay calm, stay focused. And remember, silence isn't the absence of power. It is power. Because here, we don't just talk about psychology, we use it.